for Wednesday, December 4th, 2019. Can I have a roll call, please?
Certainly. Member Bishop.
Here?
Member Sorensen.
Here.
Member Johnson. Excuse me, Member Twitchell. Sorry, I apologize.
I like that I look like I'm 18, right?
I'm going down the list from my old minutes, but yes, you can take the
Just kidding.
compliment.
I'm just kidding. Here.
Member Patterson.
Here.
Co-Chair Purrier.
Here.
Co-Chair Renner.
Here. Okay, it's been a little while since we had full meeting minutes, but we have considerations of the July 1st, 2019 SEC meeting minutes. Do we have any comments, additions, subtractions? If not, can I get a motion to accept?
All moved.
Second. Okay. Roll call?
Voice votes.
All voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All right, we have non-agenda items. I don't see anyone here in the audience tonight. So then, we don't need to change the order of the meeting, so I think we'll just get into general business.
Certainly. So, as mentioned, it's been a bit of time since we've come together as a group. We wanted to give you, we thought maybe the best way to approach this was to look at the last year or two of items the SEC has considered and try to give updates on everything we have updates to offer.
Great.
So that's chickens and bees, that's the landscape playbook, that's the sustainability plan, and then some communication stuff. So the first off, chickens and bees, again, pilot program, still 2 participants for chickens, none for bees. You remember there were a couple others that were came forward and approved, but ultimately they didn't pursue that for other reasons. So as we're going into 2020, there's a couple minor clarifications we would suggest you recommend to the village board. The only item not listed on here that came up in the past was the idea of perhaps staggering the meeting when you would consider bee renewals and the meeting you would consider chicken renewals. Right now, we don't think the volume is there for that to be necessary. The 2 changes we would recommend is this. First, there's some ambiguity about if that $50 fee is the first time or every year, especially with volume as low as it is, and based on our experience, we don't think that a renewal fee is necessary.
Great.
Similarly,
Those non-existent eggs are getting cheaper.
Oh, I was saying we could rank the fees by the number of eggs produced.
Yes. So, yes, keep going.
yes, and similarly, the biggest pain point I think we heard from all 4 applicants, certainly 3 of the 4, was the letter sending process. So when this program was originally made, there was a hope that you'd have to speak to your neighbors personally, and then as an adaptation to that requirement, there was the idea that you would send letters personally. We think that's just kind of a pain point.
Onerous.
Yeah, and we would recommend that that the village just send notice the same way we do for other reviews in the village. Nothing precludes a person from sending their own letters as well.
I had a question, not about those 2 specific items, which sounded fine, but
Sure.
Since we have had some chicken permits successful, how long does it need to be a pilot? Can that one be adopted as a program and maybe bees as a pilot because we haven't had one?
Sure.
Or that all started before I joined, so I wasn't sure what the strategy, is it a 3-year pilot? Was it a 1-year pilot?
It was 5.
Oh, so it's got to be a pilot for 5 years?
Let me I believe it's 3, but I've got it right here.
So we've completed, this was year 2?
2, I believe.
Okay.
It would go through March 1, 2021. So
Okay.
this is coming
Okay, all right,
halfway.
thank you.
Okay. The only thing I would say is whether we get a report back, the village would interview to see what the experience has been and learn, because we want to learn, obviously, right? And the board may want to understand what was the experiences, maybe a letter to the neighbor, it's been X years, if you have any comments to share with the village, please let us know. We can ask the owner to maybe provide some feedback, because we want to fine tune it. I mean, besides, we want to hear good things or bad things, but it sounds like there's been no issues, so I know the board may be interested in getting that feedback.
Certainly, I know, partially when this goes to the village board, that would be an opportunity for them to talk at that level about the pilot program. They'd have to adopt something to
Sure.
like this. As far as ongoing with your group, we would always invite back the owners to at least do that meeting step, even if it's free for them to renew.
So one thing that, I mean, personal experience, I feel like it's echoing. Personal experience is that I made the application to the state of Illinois for our chicken certification. Is that what it's called, Glenn?
It's a registration.
Yeah. And it's been 4 months? So, yeah, September probably. Anyways, I have not gotten a word back,
So
not in.
as a homeowner, you have to register your chickens with the
That's
state?
part of our requirement, and and so,
But there is a chicken registry in Illinois?
Sure.
Yes.
So it's
Betcha.
the Department of Ag, or I think Department of
Yeah.
Natural Resources, keeps a registry that I think would ordinarily be voluntary for these sites. The idea being that if there's like an avian flu outbreak or something
They
like
know
that,
who to reach.
know where to find it.
Got it.
The village, as part of the pilot program, requires you to at least apply and try to get registered.
Got it.
Obviously, I'm sure this is 6 chickens is probably not the highest priority for that.
no, I mean, and clearly when you get on the site to do the registration, they're talking about sort of a controlled a CAFO, a controlled animal feeding operation. That's what they're looking for, not just me in my backyard.
Okay.
So,
They got your notification, they kind of chuckled and said, that's
but
sweet.
they've done nothing.
Right.
I mean,
It's
had I
circular
not
file.
copied Glenn when I sent it,
There's no record.
there's no record. I have gotten no acknowledgement, I didn't get a read receipt, I didn't get anything. But I filled out the form and off it went, so,
Do you have to pay anything for that, or no? It's just
No.
a registration?
it's just, yeah,
Okay.
it just goes under why. That's all. I mean, presumably, if there was an avian flu outbreak, the village would know who has chickens and would be able to say, hey, if you didn't already know, because they were toes up in your yard, so. But, we've had no predators.
That was my question.
Yes, so,
Of life.
we did have this, it's a modified baby playpen, which was there to hold the chicks. And seriously, this was from the 50s, where it had a top on it that you could open up. And then we would put them in this dog flexible coop, and they would go out and eat wherever it was that we put that coop that day. And the cozy coop, which is what the playpen was, did one day have a raptor sitting on it, and the little chicks going like this. But other than that, yeah, lunch, but the other one was pretty open to the top. I mean, it didn't require, and they never had the raptor go in there, so. Anyways,
Which is really, I think, interesting feedback, because I might have predicted another outcome for at least one of your chicks.
well, we sort of thought that too, that there might be a sacrificial chick. We haven't had that. Chicken nugget. Yeah, so one of them is named Nugget.
You're
The
not
other one is
supposed to name.
Frida,
Oh, nice.
Sister Mary Catherine. Yeah, anyways, so there it goes.
Perfect.
Yeah, they do have names.
Okay.
Okay.
To conclude that conversation, if you wanted to recommend that be struck because
Oh,
of your
yeah,
experience.
again, I think it would be more important for the village to know that there were chickens, and than it is for the state to know they're chickens. So my recommendation is, let's try and make this easier rather than harder. I would say, as with any pet, chickens generate waste, and so that's been in, you know, the shavings go into my compost pile. And, but there's stuff to clean every day.
Now, you would lease the chickens, right? Did you then
Well,
purchase them?
actually, so we were too late to lease.
Oh, okay.
So we ended up getting chicks, which was a whole different
Yeah.
experience.
So then do you own those?
Yeah,
They're yours?
they're ours. That's why we could name them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So will you overwinter them or no?
They're overwintering, yeah. And they have a golf ball in their nesting bins so that they can,
Like a prompt?
yes. So you remember as children, you probably saw a wooden egg at some point in your life. Those
Yeah.
were actually put in the nesting boxes to get the chickens to think about laying eggs. Seriously, that's what the wooden egg was for.
All right then.
Look at what you've learned.
Yeah, but a golf ball will work. And they have a,
Maybe not. I know what to get Marina for Christmas.
I just found some new Village promo merch.
yeah, exactly. Yes, so far, it's not entirely rewarding, but it's actually pretty rewarding. It's fun. And the chicken cam is,
Oh,
Very fun.
nice.
That's fun.
You really get like a nanny cam?
yeah,
It's pretty great.
Is this live streamed on the internet?
yes, I mean, on the internet? No. So they're actually in the nesting box.
Oh, they're pretty.
Oh, yes, they're gorgeous. They're on the village website.
Nice colors, different colors.
Two New Hampshire, or 3 New Hampshire Reds and 2 Wyandottes. The Wyandottes are the black and white ones.
Beautiful.
Henrietta and Sister Mary Catherine.
So they'll have pretty eggs.
I
She
think it's
doesn't
a
know.
pale blue,
Yeah, like
yeah.
a pale soft green.
Who
Well,
knew?
we're anxiously
Green eggs and
awaiting
ham.
with you.
Green eggs and ham, exactly. If they would just get to it, I could have brought Christmas presents for everybody. Not so much.
Okay, what else you need, Glenn?
Well, if you,
I'm okay with the state, waiving the state, as long as, because like, if there is an issue, obviously the village would be aware of it, and then they have records of who, you know.
well, if that's the case,
Do you need a motion to accept those changes?
Bingo.
So moved.
Do we have a motion to reduce the amount, the amount of time for the pilot, or
Well, let's start with the state,
changes?
yeah,
And the other 2 recommended changes,
okay.
Yes.
which were $50 once,
$50 once,
and,
we send the letters, and strike the Department of Ag registration requirement.
you.
Okay, roll call?
Certainly. Member Bishop,
Aye.
Member Sorensen,
Aye.
Member Twitchell,
Aye.
Member Patterson,
Aye.
Co-Chair Purrier,
Aye.
Co-Chair Renner.
Aye.
Motion carries. So next up on the agenda, the landscape playbook. So I guess I would say 3 items going on here. So first, we have had some outreach aside from what was discussed in the memo. We sent copies of the playbook to a lot of the key landowners along the corridors, especially the 176 corridor. I met with Bill Susi with the water agency. It was- Yeah, with Jawa, CLC Jawa here, I think it was in September, maybe early October. You know, him, I, and Jody Mariana from Tesca. Cliff unfortunately was unable to join us, but good conversation. We're hoping to have them include some of these principles in some upcoming landscape work they're doing in the next few years, so.
Do they want to make
Promising.
donations to support it? I apologize.
Oh my God, my chickens are under attack.
Sorry, I thought I silenced it. It is, it's silenced.
That was a good one.
I don't get it. Sorry. Child in the middle of stressful exams. I keep getting texts. I can't handle it. I don't know what's gonna happen.
Wait till college.
It is college.
Oh,
What did I
That's
say?
fair.
High school? Did I say-
No, you just
No, we
said
just
child in the
assumed.
middle of
Yeah,
it.
no,
assumed
it is
because
college.
you're so young.
Oh, yeah, that's right, I'm only 18. I apologize.
quite all right. So, we're continuing to try and reach out, make contact, excuse me, with landowners in the corridor. And then, of course, there's the buckthorn clearance issue and the out-year design issue. So our hope going into this year was to spend some money set aside to help start up buckthorn clearance with, by assisting Lobola. I think that was really the genesis of this project a couple years back. Unfortunately, their position now is that they need more financial support than we have to offer to really get started with that project, which is disappointing. It's over $20,000, so it would require us to go out for competitive bids. Doesn't mean we have to take the lowest bid, but there would have to be a process and costs evaluated.
The trick is, it's a big project and it's cost for them. I mean, they're willing to do the volunteer hours, but there's equipment and chipping and there's stuff that,
Hopefully, if we go out for bids, that would prove that.
yeah,
but-
yeah.
So,
Show the value. So that, for sure, mostly for sure, we wouldn't be able to start that this fiscal year. So through May 1, the resources aren't there. As the village starts its budget discussions, we're going to look at ways of accomplishing that, bidding the project.
Are there any
what it takes.
public-private partnerships that exist? Any particular donors within the community that might be willing to take this on?
Yeah, like I know a big cost to them is just the herbicide, so much as buckthorn and they've got to paint it all and herbicide's expensive. So I don't know if there's a way to get that
And is-
donated or get.
Yeah,
I
is
don't
there an
know.
opportunity for a grant for invasives?
Certainly. So as part of the 125, the Quasqui Centennial celebrations, the 125 committee has been soliciting for donors. And we think there's some fertile ground there, no pun intended, but that'll still take some time to materialize. There's been some preliminary interest in someone partnering, perhaps for the clearance or perhaps for the whole project, but that will take time to come together. That's one of the few legacy projects the committee is marketing. As far as grant opportunities, we keep in tune with some regional grants. There hasn't been anything really applicable in this case. There is a ComEd grant that's available from time to time that we could look at, but that would require some pretty specific costs. We'd have to, before we'd apply for it, I think we'd have to be at the end of having a project bid, a contract close to ready to sign,
So they
and having concrete numbers.
They did along the bike path in Lake Forest. ComEd was hugely helpful from Fort Sheridan up to Lake Forest in the,
With Lake Forest Open Lands?
with Lake Forest Open Lands. And that was something that Lake Forest Open Lands applied for. So maybe Lake Bluff needs to,
I know we've definitely talked about that. We received a different ComEd grant this year for some public safety equipment, and so I think that's definitely in the mix. But we would have to have a more developed project to be able to apply with, which dovetails pretty nicely into the third conversation. So what we're looking at doing, if none of this really comes together, this group talked earlier in the year about working through perhaps phase 2 construction drawings for the landscape that would come in that area. We're now talking about using that money to prepare a bit of construction documents, but mostly to have a consultant's assistance in working through preparing the bid documents, performing construction oversight, the things that come with public works projects that are competitively bid. And so, again, we still have this pot of resources, and we're still looking for ways to keep this moving forward.
yeah, because I know that we wanted them to take this conceptual and finish out the plans to a certain extent, get them lined up in phases, and also give the village and us those budgets per phase, so that that could all be put together in, whatever, 5-year plan, whatever plan that's necessary, and then we can target funding and getting outside resources. So is that, is that what you're saying? That's still the idea, to finish out the landscaping plans and get budgets put together?
The issue we're trying to balance is this, and by all means, if this committee has feedback, I can take it back and we can see where it goes, is we have a relatively small pot of money to work with in the current fiscal year.
Right.
And it will probably not be possible to spend that both on the design for what is to come,
Right.
as well as getting the engineering services that are probably necessary to start.
Okay.
And it's, there's at least a year or two of invasive clearance
Sure.
work ahead before you could even start to turn dirt.
Right.
I'm just the reality of.
I'm just concerned that we don't, and the board doesn't, have the big picture of what this entire project is gonna cost.
That's what I was gonna say. Does anybody
And,
have any
we
idea?
go in and we spend, let's say, $20,000 on the buckthorn removal. And then we're like, okay, and it's like, well, what do we tell the board to budget for 2021 or 2022? We don't know.
We don't have a plan.
The little park that's on Washington,
Yeah.
that was budgeted at $67,000. And that's just, what, 2,500 square feet? Yeah, no, that's not, bigger than that, but it's not big.
Right.
And that was certainly a more complex plan, but yeah, these
It's
things.
it's complex, but it's still, when you think about the
Wow.
space.
I mean, I'm not saying the buckthorn doesn't need to be done. I mean, it should be done, but
Pardon me?
I'm just saying for us to know if this is gonna work and for the village to understand the magnitude of what might be facing it over a 5-year period.
Well, we were talking about putting in split rail fence and some
Right.
expensive things
Right.
too.
And, if you have,
Sadly, oh, go ahead.
go ahead. If you had a budget for all those items, like this area is this much, the split rail is this much, this is this much, then there's a menu where us and recommendations of board go, well, this, and we can skip that for now and do this, and we recommend that, or no, that's way too expensive, we better shelve that. I don't know.
If the consensus of the group is that that should be the priority, certainly that's some useful guidance for us. I can bring that back and we can see if we can get this going. Certainly there's, whatever path is chosen, there's enough time left in the fiscal year to pursue that. But if the thinking is that the bigger picture is the most important piece, I can definitely relay that.
What do you guys think?
It might be good also to talk to Lake Bluff Open Lands, in that I know, they had really wanted to work on it last summer because they'd had funding for a certain number of interns, so they knew they had manpower, because, volunteers are volunteers. It's nice to have some anchors with the interns. I don't know if they have money for next year or the next, or maybe it's part of that centennial piece, if we got some money that helps them have some intern, I don't know, it's just, so anyway, those are some of the things that if we are doing the big plan, we may lose their capacity when they have capacity.
I mean, I'm open to it. If we try and pursue the budgeting for, or the funding for just the buckthorn removal, that's fine, but we could do that, and then nothing happens after that, because we then have to wait to then get funding for the big plan.
Well, and the trick is, if you take it all out, you want to put something in its place.
Right.
Or otherwise, it's gonna be all weeds. And so
Right.
then, if you don't have the plan, you don't want to spend a bunch of money putting plugs
Well,
and seed and all
Right,
that.
yeah,
if
that's where I'm kinda going at it.
yeah,
If we spend all the money that we can't finish up the plan, although we have partial plans for that one area, and you could just go ahead and say, okay, we're just gonna start on that, and then we'll finish the whole plan. I don't know, it's complicated to know without budgets, and I know the board's gonna be like, well, what's all this gonna cost? We know what the buckthorn might cost, but we don't know
Yeah.
what all the rest of it's
Well,
gonna
it might be
cost.
good to have an overall plan and then be like, well, Lake Bluff Open Lands could mitigate this amount by
Right.
what they can do.
Right.
And
And I don't think it's, because I work in this area, it's not taking it to construction level landscape plans, it's taking the landscape plans far enough that they can be cost estimated in phases. So that's usually about 50% construction drawing level is sufficient for a cost estimating or someone to provide, budgets for all the phases. So I don't know if we've gone to the, sorry, what's the name of the landscape company? Or the design, Tesco?
Joint between Tesca and Landscape Artistry, same.
Yeah, if we've gone to them and said, okay, what is it gonna cost us just to to get the documents far enough that we can reasonably estimate all the phases of the project. What is that number?
Did they not take it further than what we saw? I thought the village had gone back to them and asked them to sort of get to the next phase, or that.
We had
or
a
that's-
proposal to do that, and as this, what I described, developed.
Okay,
we
it
did not
costs
proceed
money,
with
so
that
we didn't
proposal
pursue
yet.
it. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So we've still got time to do that in this year, if that was,
Can you just, what was that deliverable? Was it just taking the designs a little farther? It didn't include budgets and costs?
I don't have it handy, but it definitely included budgets, costs. I don't know if a probable cost is the appropriate term here.
Yeah,
It's not intended, but
right, yeah.
It would have had a phased schedule and cost for those phases.
If that's not unreasonable, I think we should do that as soon as possible.
Glenn, are you saying that, are you asking us to say if we want this to be the highest priority for the overall look of this committee, or just
Dealing with
Just
this
for that
one.
plan.
just this one plan? Okay.
It's not very often that a plan is sharpened up to one issue, but it makes it simple when it is. So if that's the consensus, again,
I think
Bring
it's
that
a
back.
good idea to pursue, and also having those plans might help with any legacy projects or partners.
okay.
And I would keep Labola in the loop just so they feel like they're in the loop. You know, I think that's
I
important.
think Drew and Larry probably talk about once a month at this point and go
Okay.
compare notes. So I think that channel is open.
Going, okay.
Okay?
Okay. So after that, some updates on the sustainability plan. I'm gonna go through these relatively fast. If anyone wants any more detail on these, just stop, we can explain. So again, haven't made progress on every single item, but I think some good progress to show over the last few months. Commercial recycling, we're getting into a position to be able to issue that bid. Again, state law, for those of you not familiar, state law imposes what I would call a fairly onerous process on us to bid this out to a franchise hauler. So the span of time it takes from starting to getting one is like a 5-year process, and we're in year 3. But this is where things, silly, but this is where things start to
It takes
accelerate.
5 years to find a waste hauler for commercial buildings?
So
Is that
state,
what you're saying?
not quite. So state law says that if you're going to award an exclusive franchise, first you have to spend 3 years seeing how good the existing haulers are recycling. And if they're so good at it, you can't issue a franchise. You have to let them continue. So we've just either have or are imminently going to conclude that part. And the haulers have not performed to the level they need to. And so at that point, we are allowed to issue a request. We need to hold hearings beforehand, we need to issue the request for so long, we need to hold hearings after, and then it takes a year after we issue it before the hauler can actually start. So that is all courtesy of the General Assembly.
When you say that the current hauler is not performing,
In the aggregate, the current individual commercial haulers for the last 3 years have been required to
the
report.
commercial
Commercial, yeah, the
haulers, not-
businesses,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I
So
didn't
this is,
even think commercial folks were required to recycle.
exactly.
They're
They're
not,
not.
right? Yeah.
But they generate a lot of recycling waste.
So then do the haulers just choose to recycle some of it, or do
They
some?
don't.
They don't.
Yeah.
This is the dynamic.
so they're making us wait to see if they're doing a bad job.
So we know they're doing a bad job, we just have to wait.
Then we can say, okay, company X is now taking over all business recycling, just like Groot does for residential. I'm not saying it's Groot, whoever, you know.
This is the process.
Wouldn't the process instead be, we're gonna require, the requirement is
Businesses.
gonna be that businesses have to do it, so hauler that has the contract, can you make adjustments? And if you can't, then we do a new one. It seems like a weird
Can
process.
we make adjustments mid-contract or no?
Well, but if the law changes.
Yeah. So this is,
speak.
I haven't studied that.
Sorry, Glenn,
No.
I'm not versed in it, so I'm
I'm not
probably
versed
driving
in
you
it either.
crazy.
I'm versed in the part about awarding a single franchise. I'm not versed on if we could do what you just proposed. Of course, that would preclude us from ever being able to issue a single franchise. And that has benefits, not just for village revenue, but that's less trucks. That's
Yes,
one phone call. There's
yes. We want a single contract for commercial recycling.
Because there's a whole bunch of different haulers, is that the deal? Each company chooses its own?
Right, and it
I'm
beca-
aware of 4, but I think the 4th's been bought up. Go ahead.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so,
So again, 4 businesses, or 4 haulers, there's only really 3 large commercial areas in the village.
Mm-hmm.
Not the most efficient arrangement.
that's good. Another year or two.
Hmm?
Another year or two.
Another
We're
year
on
or
the,
two.
we're on the track.
We're on the track. Again, there will be noticeable activities happening in 2020. We will most likely be able to bid and award a contract in 2020, and then it's just a waiting period to allow the current haulers to move on.
Okay.
So.
All right.
So similarly, solid waste, the plan talks about educational programs. We have 2 we're working on with Swalco that we are considering, and I believe the public comment you have in front of you talks about one of these. So cart tagging, the idea is recycling contamination is a big issue. That's part of why China doesn't accept our recycling in the first place now, too dirty. And so the idea is you would have volunteers or go before the truck, after the bins are put out, before the truck comes out. You go, you flip the lid open. Does it look like clean recycling? If so, great. If not, there's a hang tag. You punch off the things you saw. We'd note the address. We'd go back in a couple weeks.
Here's the one Lake Forest is using.
There you go.
But I would say this about that, that's a very white piece of paper,
There's,
meaning it's not recycled paper, it is bleached,
you can have white recycled paper,
not that white.
but, well, and the back is empty and all that.
I see.
It needs to be a recycled paper.
Good point. Who would the volunteers be?
Not the sustainability committee. Just checking. But Mrs.
You're always welcome to join.
I'm thinking
Are they
Mrs.
professionals?
Nawar's class. Well,
That's a good idea.
Yeah, that's
why not?
In this case, we actually think Swalco is probably in a position to provide that
Oh.
staffing. They
Well,
have
well then, I mean,
AmeriCorps
they're the
intern.
experts.
Right.
some other
So
resources.
are we
can tap.
failing presently in
Yeah,
Lake
do we
Bluff?
have stats on that?
That is an interesting question. So we don't have good stats on that right now. There are stats at a larger level back here in Lake Bluff. Something we've talked about doing before we even get into cart tag is that group would tip a couple of their recycling trucks out, kind of in a separated area in the waste site, before it's commingled with everything else, they tip a couple Lake Bluff trucks out, and they just sift through it there and try to get some sense of what we're doing percentage-wise for a route for the
Yeah.
village. If that's low enough, this may be unnecessary. If you were doing very well, if you're doing 5, 10, 15%, this probably doesn't have the bang for the buck you're looking
But-
for,
but-
although it's free.
In large part, it's education.
Yes.
It is.
And so even before we get to a cart tag, I think that we should be bombarding in the president's message in the,
Yeah.
on the website.
It might be interesting, though, to get that statistic, if they do that sampling, so that then we can see if we do an education campaign, what's the did it make a difference? Lake Forest has what's interesting, I'd be curious how Lake Bluff compares, but Lake Forest, 95% of the community recycles, but there's 25% contamination, so that all has to be landfilled. And so they have a goal to get to 10%.
Do we have anyone taking advantage, do you know, of the scrap program that we have year-round?
That's one of the data questions we've had going into this. Something we're considering is that, the volunteers are out and about anyway. What else can they do while they're already in front of someone's house? this lid label thing we'll get to is one part of that. Another part is, can we take a tally of who's doing food scrap recycling? The trick, of course, is that this is probably going to happen in the spring. It's still fairly cold outside, so there's no other landscape waste or anything. So
Right,
the
but-
good news is, it would only be food scraps. The bad news is, we're wondering if that would be a low participation time.
If you
for
look
that.
at your chart that you sent, I was amazed at what can go into that food scrap
I was
area.
as well.
And I was wondering, how are people doing this? How do you keep food scraps in
From
the
smelling?
winter and keep the animals out of it?
They don't smell it. It gets frozen.
But where do you put it?
Well, you can put it in anything, in a little bin.
In your garage?
Sure.
Groot will gladly give you a 35-gallon container for $100 a year, very affordable.
I mean,
You'd like
For
a third
food
one?
waste?
Just
Yes.
for food waste, yeah.
And then you can put in, it looked like you could put in paper in this, and, I mean, your chart was,
I put in
Putting
paper
things
in my compost.
I do too, but I was amazed at what they were suggesting you put in your, with your food
Food
scraps.
Yeah.
Bones. They-
Bones and
I do
fish.
bones. I don't do bones, but I do fish. I do, like mussels or anything like that. Those go into my compost.
I don't
See
do
the
any of that.
raccoons Flying
Just
through
do
my garage
vegetable.
door.
Right, all vegetable.
It's like,
Yeah.
oh.
I haven't, I
And
mean,
would
I
love
don't
to
even,
do it.
I don't even latch my, compost bin. I just lift it off. I haven't had anything go in 5 years.
My dog,
Just
my dog goes in mine. Well,
Dogs.
surveying the food waste one's tricky though, because it could be in with all your leaves or, that's a hard one.
Yeah. I like the idea, though, of the education, then having Groot do spot checks and then moving, up in steps.
Yeah,
I also think that, Groot spot checking would be better than,
yes.
red-banded people walking down the street and peeking in your garbage.
Except for, but I do think that if you had the kids from the classrooms doing it, that they are going to hold their parents to the, their feet to the fire. I really do. I mean, you'll get buy-in.
Right.
Gee, Brian, you didn't wash out your plastic container.
I know. You can just, instead of this, you can put it like a scarlet R on the garage
Red.
door.
But people do get
Greta.
sensitive about you looking in their garbage and,
Right, I think,
Dumpster diving.
yeah.
well, but also anyway, what they're doing,
Yeah.
how are they spending their weekend or whatever,
There are sensitivities.
Yeah.
That's fine.
So one thing that would be good for you guys to know is that Lake Forest Garden Club made a $110,000 grant to the city of Lake Forest to do a public education campaign around recycling contamination. And Marina and I have both talked to them about how we really want Lake Bluff to be involved in that and all the materials to be available to the village. And the waste folks in Lake Forest said that they are in regular communication with you. They thought it would be really easy to dovetail that together, so that may help offset costs. They're also working with the high school and the media lab or the media center, and the students are gonna develop short videos like PSAs on stuff, so all of that would be available to us as well.
Great.
No,
That would be great.
I
Embed
am-
some PSAs in the Friday newsletter.
Yeah. Easy to do.
Easy. And a little more entertaining than, well, our village Facebook page is good. That gets good ratings.
I could see if I could get you a live feed to the chicken can.
That's actually
I think
a
that would
pretty
be
interesting
big.
idea.
That would be big.
People
People
would
love
like
that stuff.
And apparently one of the biggest issues is people either putting their recycling in plastic bags and then into their thing, or putting, you know, like jewel bags in there, both of which are huge problems and require it to be dumped in the landfill. So I don't know if Lake Bluff, if Groot is expressing
there.
that same frustration or not. Do we know?
Well, a big, one of the distortions going on right now is if you're a recycling hauler, right? You can sell aluminum, you can turn a buck off that. You can sell, and this is local rates, you can sell aluminum, you can give away paper. The plastic's not moving. So to a large extent,
I'm talking about the plastic bags, though, not the plastic itself.
yeah, I'm just saying, and I can't speak for our particular waste site, but in some cases, this is just being compressed and palletized. It's not being sorted because there's no market for it yet. It's just being
Right.
mothballed until
But I
there's a
mean,
market.
if they open it and you have used a kitchen garbage bag to hold your recycling, at least what Lake Forest said, is that
all
immediately
goes-
goes to the landfill instead of being sorted and compressed and, you know, if it gets recycled or not. So,
So that's part of
I
the
was-
education process.
yeah, so I wasn't sure how we're doing on that front, if Groot is expressing, like, we have to dump a lot of your recycling because Lake Bluffers
contaminated.
aren't doing it right.
A part of where we got to this, let's dump the truck out and check, is that group thinks we may be doing better than average.
Look at us.
Instead of the
Of
contrary.
course.
Amazing.
Okay.
That's because we had a sustainability committee years before anybody else. Seriously.
Okay, what's up next?
Sure. So again, the lid labels, same principle applies. We have volunteers out already. Slap a label on the lid, try to make this
So
very
do those
obvious.
labels exist already?
Yeah, so those labels, they're not here in Lake Bluff yet. These labels are from another Swalco community, perhaps Gurnee, I'm not sure, but I mean, clearly they're,
So is it an issue at all, Glenn, if it's a Swalco label? Swalco recycles differently than Groot. Like, it's not all the same
so
stuff. So-
part of that is an
True.
interesting point you raised, and the goal is to make that not true. So Swalco has made these county-wide recycling guidelines. It's actually Lake Forest that sort of deviates more than that from the others, but the idea is that the solid waste acceptance facilities in the county, the haulers in the county, would follow those guidelines. And
Nice.
so it should be the same ones are applicable to any Swalco community.
That
To
would
the
be
extent,
great.
if you compare the two, the only place we really differ is that some of our older materials are stricter about food scraps, and that's because partially people are getting more comfortable with food scraps, and partially
I thought it
they
related
want
to
more
like,
volume.
I can't remember now, like in Lake Bluff, you can recycle your Starbucks cup, but in Lake Forest, you can't. Like, there's certain.
If your Starbucks cup is rinsed out.
That's right.
And so that, our nearest neighbor, of course, is one of the few people in the municipal recycling business, and so they aren't regulated by Swalco. And so that's where it seems like there's a lot of diversity. But the commercial
It would be nice. if it-
haulers are relatively on the same page.
Okay.
Or can we recycle number 6, which is in Lake Bluff, which is for the,
I think we don't. I just was looking at the app because I keep putting 6 in because it used to be that you could, but I don't think you
6
can.
is the planters, the black, if you went to
Oh.
Pasquazi's and bought a plant.
Yeah, I don't think
I
that's
think it's,
recyclable
when I
anymore.
looked on that app, which is great, it said
Will Pasquazi take them back?
No.
We can
Milk
make them.
cartons too are always, the coated cartons are always a dilemma for me. It's like, do we or don't we? And I keep going back and forth.
Yeah, like Swalco told me years ago, those, your chicken broth or what?
Yeah,
those
the
vacuum-
Tetra Pak.
Yeah, they said they were setting it up to be able to recycle it. So I was doing it, but I think then maybe we're not supposed to. Anyway, I'm confused
It's on
too.
this chart as being
Yes.
a yes, and that's why
Okay,
and I was like, oh no, because I've not been doing that. I thought it was,
okay,
it
good.
goes on and on.
I will double check on that and get back to you. As far as I know,
Okay.
it's
I
only
think the
styrofoam
labels are
products that-
awesome. It's a great idea to put that, because it would be something you open the lid and it's right there.
Always right
Constant.
there.
Would be
Reminder.
brilliant, yeah.
Yeah, and if the sustainability committee members who probably like to recycle have questions, that's a good place to start.
And I think that we would have a benefit by doing something at the farmer's market next year. Some kind of visual, like
So-
even if it was piles of trash.
There's a
As
cool
people were coming and
display.
going, and it would be a great display for us, because
See if I can
Green
find it.
Minds has the
Yeah, I was just gonna
display,
say Green
right,
Minds has one.
Sophie?
Yeah, I think I took a
It's
picture of
not
it.
quite perfect. It's these big boards
They're
that
like
show,
museum vitrine kind of things.
but they aren't necessarily in alignment with what Swalco does, or Groot, pick one. But they're close.
Remember at the farmer's market, under the current village regulations, we're not allowed on the property even though we're village.
I know.
I still want that to change, but that's a whole nother issue with.
Can we vote on that right now? Can we?
That's what the display looks like.
Well, I think, you mean being on the village?
Yeah, can we make a recommendation to the board, of trustees?
Well, they then would have to do that with the farmer's market committee, right?
Sure, but
Sure.
if it comes up from us,
And I don't know when
Especially for
I don't know
public
when the
service.
farmer's market committee contract renewal comes up and,
They generally discuss it,
Well, that's the
the
perfect
second
place
meeting
to
of
start.
May.
Early too.
It would be a
They were
good,
able to come, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Last year they went.
so, I mean,
No.
really, if we want to,
I agree. I think this, but the sustainability committee is just one. I could see public safety, the fire,
Sure.
the police, village sanctioned organizations for public benefit, non-for-profit, should be able to have a display booth.
sure, I second that.
Okay,
That is
all right.
perfect.
So we can make
Okay.
It's real.
take a while to get.
So is it just village sanctioned, is that, because Green Minds did bring that last year, they were able to do it, but it's because it's a village thing?
The,
Village is not allowed to be at a farmer's market.
nobody's allowed to be on except businesses that are approved to sell products at the farmer's market. And
Well, they have educational pieces, because Green
They
Minds
were
came
across the street.
Yeah,
and,
but that's
they're
not the
across the street, they're not
village.
allowed, they're not allowed
well,
actually on the
Master
village.
Gardeners from Botanic Garden were on the
Right.
premises too, and the garden
Were they
club went and.
selling?
No,
Maybe, were
were
they
just
selling
giving
something?
It was
information.
information.
Yeah, so
Educational stuff, so
The market, of course, invites, they invite certain people.
okay.
They do.
Invite the master gardeners to talk about gardening. They invite children's entertainers to entertain children. They invite musicians to play music. They invite the library.
So maybe it's a workaround that we ask them to invite
Invite us.
Yeah.
some Green Minds or something, I don't know.
Okay.
We want to join the party too.
Such a perfect place.
Moving on down the list.
Yeah.
Paper consumption, so water meter replacement project getting ready to happen. Again, you have some notes at your desk, at the dais about this. This comes up a few times. That'll get rid of about 3,000 postcards, gets rid of some vehicle miles traveled. We weren't able to ballpark an estimate for you on that, but that's every street in the village, 4 times a year, plus a little bit of change for, break for a day, come back for a day. And also there's, you'll see on this Monday's village board meeting, there's some new vehicle sticker software coming up that has a website. So if you want, you don't have to print anything off. You don't have to do any of that. You can just go on there and buy your sticker there and save a trip, maybe save a little bit of
And
paper.
then it gets mailed to you.
It still does get mailed to you, yeah, so there's still some paper moving back and forth. I think you'll receive a notice telling you it's time to renew either way, but it's an incremental benefit.
Okay.
How, do we have any stats on how often the Friday newsletter gets opened?
We do, yeah,
By
there,
how many people?
so there's some stats specific to your documents at the end of that memo. As a general rule, there's maybe just under 1,500 subscribers, and in any given week, we can confirm 40 to 45% of them open the newsletter. There's some people that may read the newsletter that don't hit to that number because of privacy preferences and things like that. But
Glenn, I
About
couldn't
half.
hear you. What percent did you say open it?
45.
I'm sorry, about 40 to 45% that we can measure. There's probably some we can't
That are
measure
hidden?
that
Mhm.
are in there as
That's
well.
pretty good.
So, do you think there's any opportunity, at least with the vehicle stickers, that if you send it, put it in the newsletter in March or February, a month ahead of time, you would not only get your sticker ahead of time, that we wouldn't have to send you a reminder, we wouldn't have to, I mean, is there a way to reduce paperwork based on the 45% of the people that would open their Friday letter? Could you incent them by saying it's $5 cheaper, or you can have the prettier one, or, I mean, pick something?
People are very insistent about their low-numbered vehicle stickers.
Yes, okay, so if
Low
you gave.
number?
low number-
Seriously?
It's a thing.
Some
That's a
people-
thing?
I was told years ago.
Some people
That's-
have their
That's what
particular
was a
number they get every
surprise.
year.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Okay.
For
I have-
example, you may never get Ryan Sandberg's jersey number.
Oh, that's interesting.
Who does, Brad? No. But seriously, I mean, could we
I don't care
do it a
about
month ahead of time on the,
Let me ask.
on the electronic version, and see if we could get
Really,
45%
that's important
of the
status
people
symbol.
buying ahead of time? That would be
Is there a
amazing.
way, when you do like register and pay for it, that you could say you would come pick it up? You know, because you used to be able to come in and bring your thing and they'd give you the sticker. So
Right.
if you could do it online and then just come and get it.
Well, the question is it more gas, is it more efficient to put it in the mail
Mail, then, I don't know, I go by.
50%.
Postman's
Village
already
Hall,
coming to your
50%.
house, right?
versus?
Well, yeah, but you gotta put it in an envelope and stamp it.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'd prefer to pick it up, but this is
Yeah.
And walk
just a
by.
question.
That's a good idea. Let me,
I'm an East Side.
in this particular year,
Walk over.
we're going to be sprinting to get that website up by March. But let me talk to our finance staff and see how much we can compress that.
Yeah.
It's a good idea.
When would we get to the point of being able to not even issue a new sticker, but just issue a sticker that once you paid, it just automatically renews,
Like
just like you do for
At the
the
Botanic
Card
Garden.
and the,
Yeah.
you know, the Art Institute. They don't issue
On it.
anything new, it just updates.
So some communities are already there. So for example, I live in Evanston. Their enforcement is based by the license plate. There's no physical stickers
Right,
issued.
That's what I was gonna go to. Right now, we moved to the app thing for the train station parking lot.
Yeah,
And you don't have to go to the machine anymore.
Oh, I
You
don't
just
know
go
how
on
to
your
do
phone and,
heaven.
Maybe we could just skip this and go right to the,
well, if we're already using that for parking enforcement, I don't know how much bigger it would be for village stickers. Although I know it's easier when you see the latest version, especially when you're going, the guy at the recycling center, eyeballing, looking for your sticker as you pull to drop off stuff.
So there was a pretty detailed conversation about that internally, and for some of the reasons you mentioned, you know, we believe that people still want to receive a physical sticker for their money.
Sure.
I will tell you, it's a point of interest. It didn't used to be that. There were just two firms in the business of helping communities with this. Passport, the same people that do our parking app, actually have just gotten into the vehicle registration business, so Evanston just switched to them. Again, things I know for living in Evanston. But, you know, an opportunity that probably won't be available to us
Okay.
for the foreseeable future.
All right, what's next?
Yeah. So model solar energy system, as we've looked at this and done some preliminary analysis, we're not sure it would make a whole lot of financial sense with the way that we're seeing the market's going, the opportunities available to us to invest in putting panels on any of our facilities. You know, our biggest facilities receive free power. And to the extent that we have other facilities, it seems like they can go to the programs, such as what we've enrolled in, to get power a bit more in a way that's a bit more economical for us. So the village did enroll in the first community solar project in Illinois. Local news, regional news, national news, great. We are plugged into a regional agreement to be able to get more of that capacity, probably up to as much as we are sure we would use every year, probably about 90% of our electrical consumption we can put through there ultimately.
Okay.
And so we're the first in Illinois to be on the road, public, private, anybody. And we hope to continue to grow the share of village energy that's benefiting from this program.
Okay.
Solutions to water loss, same story. Replacing all the meters, going to be great. Cut water loss tremendously, cut, staff investment tremendously. Fingers crossed.
How is just putting meters on gonna save I mean, I understand why we wanna put meters on, so I'm not debating that, but how does that actually save the water? That just tells us how much is going through. Am I missing something?
Sure.
I'm not a water
So,
expert in terms of measuring.
Yeah, so it's a simple concept if you think about it, right? So there's water loss is defined by the state, is defined by the Supreme Court and like national treaties and all this goofy stuff. The way we define it in Illinois is here's the water you bill and track, and here's the water you paid for or pumped, and X minus Y, right? So the problem is there are many apparent ways to lose water. Some of those are what comes to mind. You have leaky mains, or you have,
Right.
perhaps you have fire hydrants that are used. That's some unmeasured use. A very large category is meters over the course of their life start to underread, right?
Okay.
So some of these meters in town date back to the start of the village. They're over 100 years old. There are some meters that just don't
To just
tick.
take them out and put them right in the historical society.
We have a wood main, I think, at the Historical Society, but yeah.
Perfect.
I mean, there's some stuff that's
Okay,
mind-blowing.
I see.
Okay.
Okay.
And so, to some extent, does that mean less water pumped out of Lake Michigan?
No, not necessarily.
Kinda not really, but a few things it does do. So one, village taxpayers aren't paying for lost water. Two, we don't have to take corrective action to comply with the state's requirements, right? And three, once these new meters are in place, I mean, right now, there's no way, we do proactive main inspections, acoustical testings, which is when you monitor the pipe for sounds of water leaking. But there's so much unaccounted for until we get a better handle on metering. It's hard to know what's left.
That
and
is
to try and break it
actual, what
down.
we think of as lost water.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's the first step towards figuring out what
It is a big
that
step.
gap, yeah, okay.
I wouldn't say the first,
narrow
again, we've
down.
done some of these preliminary things already. We're starting to get into water main replacement proactively. But it's hard to go much farther in an empirical way until you cross this out.
Okay. Thank you.
So, another big item to cross off, the village-wide stormwater study. We tucked some slides into your packet, and I can try to talk through those. Again, I'm not a stormwater engineer, I'm somewhat well-versed in these, but results we've been waiting for, results to some extent that we've expected, big dollar amounts, big dollar amounts in the neighborhood of $32 to $40 million to fix all the problems that have been identified. Now, the good news, right, is that that's with the newest.
And fix means for the next 20 years, for the next 50 years, for the next, fix means, what do we think?
That is at least a
I know.
$40 million question.
Okay.
So, based on the, as I think we have talked about in passing before, there are some new statistical tables out, fascinating dinner time discussion, that predict, how rare or how frequent storms are. So Illinois, one of the only ones recently to update these tables, and those tables have gone way up here.
So scary.
So the good news is, most communities in the country don't have that information. So we're the most up to date. That's still a backwards-looking forecast. That's not forecasting for the future.
It's
effects of
not
climate change.
anticipating.
Yeah, because there's a lot of uncertainty around that forecast,
Sure.
right?
Right.
And as it is, again, these are some of the hardest numbers in the country, probably. See what comes out, but these are hard numbers to comply with. And these are numbers that subtly affect the financial performance of every development in the state of Illinois. So there's,
Right, but I guess we
Of
just don't, we don't
consequence.
wanna, adjust to them, because we have to.
course not.
Yeah.
Right, and if you think about it, I mean, a lot of the infrastructure was designed 50 years ago to a 10-year
Or
event.
more, yeah.
And a 10-year event now is like a 1-month event, you know? So if anything that we replace or would be part of this infrastructure improvements would be designed to whatever we design to now, whether it's the current 50 or 100, but that's based on actual, real, current time data, not something from 10 years ago, we're leaping really far up.
Yeah.
And I think at some
it's a good
point,
step.
yeah, at some point you can't,
It was depressing, though, to read the packet and say how they're adjusting, like what was I can't remember now, a 50-year event was, I almost don't want those changes to be made, because then you start to normalize it, right? You start to forget how dramatic the changes
Yeah.
are.
So to illustrate, I don't know if it was a slide or not, but the 140-year event in July 2017 would now be, I think it's like a high 80s, low 90s event. So again, hopefully, one in all of our lifetimes.
but it's,
Doubtful.
yeah,
I doubt that.
no. It's gonna be expensive to fix all that.
So then what's the strategy, Glenn? So the report will be completed in the next couple of months, is that right? And then it's a matter of the village deciding how to move forward on a $40 million project? Is that basically what
There's
we're
more than one
looking at?
project in there. There's about 7 or 8, so there's some smaller ones, there's some bigger ones. Who and how deliberates, makes recommendations on that, not decided. Certainly, there will need to be a funding mechanism. There'll need to be some priority, some scheduling. I mean, those are the big decision points that would come up probably in the next 6 to 12 months.
Big one.
But even though it's a dire development, it's still a pretty big development in working through these problems. So last few, real fast. Dark sky ordinance, we have a draft together. Brian's volunteered to take some work with his professional experience, which is superior to mine in this field, and to work with some earnest volunteers perhaps at his firm to see if not only can we get a good ordinance for the village, but see if perhaps we can advance some best practices.
Yeah, when I started working with my staff and looking at the current, the MLO that's been published, we realized that it's over 10 years old. And it's referencing, I mean, the energy codes and things have just moved on. And I reached out to the people who developed the MLO and says, why aren't you developing this every 3 or 4 years? Well, you know, committee and time. And so I'm hoping my firm will commit resources, because we won't just develop this for this village, but we'd like to use this as the new proposed model lighting
Template
ordinance
for them.
for other communities to use and to publish this. And so we've been talking about that and doing kind of a mutually beneficial. I'm gonna do it anyway, but whether we can just make use of that effort, because there's other communities who probably could
Need it.
use. And the ordinance itself is overly complicated in my mind in terms of understanding how to read it. And so I'd like to make the ordinance very easy to understand. So,
Great.
Extemporaneously, right, as a land use planning zoning guy, lighting, aside from the energy codes, is basically the wild, wild west. I mean, either you're a dark sky community or you just let people do what they want to do.
right.
And one of the things you hope is that a reasonable model is out there where every community says, gee, we should have something for lighting. And maybe it's not that you're gonna see the Milky Way at night, but
Right.
something you hope for globally.
Correct.
Has Lake Bluff ever considered, or do we have anything that's like a noise ordinance to protect us from noise pollution? Just asking.
Sure, very big box. I mean, noise is a public nuisance. There are rules about the emission of noise from industrial areas, commercial areas. Those are in the village code. Those are in state law as well. Noise pollution is one of those, 30,000 feet, it's one of those deceptively simple issues, or deceptively complicated issues, I should say. The federal government tried to get into it back in the 60s and 70s, and it was close to disastrous. That was sort of a wall that, you had the Clean Air Act, you had the Clean Water Act. I don't know if the order is right here, but noise pollution was unmanageable for them. It evolved into OSHA requirements and things
I
like
don't know,
that.
I've heard it's like different sort of history about it, but it's very
Guilty.
valuable, yeah.
One,
But was disbanded by, a certain president. And anyway, it's just something,
Also
I'm
probably
learning
true.
more and more about the health implications of noise pollution. Anyway,
I would say that to provide a brief history. Again, you are more of a subject matter expert than me in your practice. But if there are specific issues to work through, we're happy to look at them and evaluate them. I mean, the biggest ones, as a visitor to the village, I would say, are the noise from the 94 tollway.
yeah,
Can't do anything
Yeah.
about that.
Blowers.
well,
Leaf
trees,
blowers.
the blowers. I don't know if there's a way we can incentivize battery-powered stuff
They're
somehow.
they're still noisy, and you've got that
I
one-off
thought they were
guy.
quieter. No,
They're still, if it's quiet and your neighbor
still
next
hear
door
it.
is using a battery-operated, it's better than using a gas-operated,
but it's still noise.
but it's still noise.
Well, it's also pollution,
There's that.
yeah.
Yeah, the gas
And you get the one-off guy that just comes to do 1 yard, and he doesn't really
Follow the rules, right?
follow.
Well, we talked a little bit about this already. I think that's, I'd like to look at after we get through some of these other things down the list. I still think that permitting or registration for landscaping companies, and then the carrot and stick approach where
Yeah,
if you're adopting green practices, maybe your permit's free or nothing.
yeah.
But if you're
It's
just a
all good.
regular company, then cough up $500.
So maybe we put that on the 2020 docket to look at that.
I mean, my response would be the village board recently held some committees on the whole on this issue. At least leaf blowers specifically.
Yeah, I remember
Yeah,
that.
they drive us all batty.
Did not refer that issue to the sustainability committee and has reached a consensus at this point on the action to take, or in this case, not to take. If there's other noise pollution issues, certainly we can look at them for 2020, but I would probably discourage looking at that one. given-
Gotcha, because they dug there.
My neighbor's wind chimes.
And what was the rationale? I'm sorry, I don't mean to stick on this, but
Brian.
what was the rationale for not doing anything?
I mean, I wouldn't say it was not doing anything. There was some engagement from local landscape companies who said, one, that they needed to do better, and hosted a meeting of landscape companies, and I believe made a written document outlining things they would do.
That's great.
And then second, just an understanding of, some of the practical limitations that are being worked through, but that are still there around, a full-time landscape company being able to use battery-powered equipment. And
What time is it that they're not supposed to start before?
7:30, I think.
I'll
7
tell ya.
o'clock it's 7 o'clock during the week and 7:30 on the weekends.
I think it's
It's
later than that, because it's like 7:30,
was
8 o'clock, and
surprised.
everybody starts up.
Yeah.
They
exactly.
do.
It's like boom, boom, around the neighborhood.
I know it's Thursday.
So for a professional firm, it would be 8 to 6, Monday through Friday, 9 to 6, Saturday, Sundays, holidays. If you're a homeowner,
I
it's
know that's
something
not,
like this.
It's
I'm
not
not-
being
Going with
followed,
7:30.
that's not being followed in my neighborhood.
not
Well-
being followed in mine.
But if you're doing it yourself, we
Who
have a
should we
neighbor
call,
who
Glenn?
does it at midnight.
Dang this.
Actually, we ought to look at ourselves, being the village. Pretty sure they're out before 8 AM.
So that's actually been an internal point of discussion, and we've been very mindful to make sure we are starting at 8 AM.
Okay. So I wasn't,
No, it's a fair,
You weren't wrong.
I wasn't wrong, okay.
but, you know, what I would say is, I'd say this to anybody, is if you are seeing a firm out doing that outside the hours they should be, you are welcome to call the police department, and they will come out there and they will cite that person.
Yeah,
So we
I
can't
know.
be everywhere.
hate to be that neighbor, right?
Always an option,
The neighbors
especially, you know,
themselves doing
it's not
Yeah,
not like
that's
you're
the other thing
punishing
is
your
that when
neighbor,
it's not a-
you're punishing a firm.
midnight
Yeah.
one
If
night.
it's a
Yeah.
firm,
'Cause they probably
That's
didn't
one
ask
thing.
for the time for them to be there.
Yeah. If it's your neighbor out there, they're subject to different regulations, it's probably
Mm-hmm.
legal for them to do so.
okay, so then,
Okay, sorry, keep going.
You're good.
I'll try not to interrupt.
Bikes.
We haven't met
Subject.
for a while, man.
It's been so long, I haven't changed the clock.
Sorry.
I know, I keep
I
looking
know.
at that going, oh, it's loud.
We'll get you a ladder, Glenn.
I think there's one back there, but I don't know that one would be the one on. So ravine stabilization, there's a project out to bid. I'm not sure if it's going to be awarded on Monday or, you know, in January, but should be constructed in April. Again, nice project to keep supporting our public and private ravines. The stormwater study also has some ravine work in it. And as far as bicycle and pedestrian specific improvements, there's a complete streets policy the village recently adopted. Formalizes,
great.
yeah, some of what I hope was already happening. There's only so much construction we do as a village, but try to continue to implement these things incrementally. That bike trail lighting project is still slated to be constructed this year. We had some help from co-chair Renner as far as implementing some dark sky principles in there, as far as
great.
active lighting management and
Did
trying
they,
to reach some
did they decide on a
compromises.
scope yet, or still determining, because there were options, like alternates?
Yeah, I think it's out, I remember, I was in some of the conversations about the alternates. I have to be honest, I don't know which one was picked.
Okay.
I know it's out to bid, and I know at least one of those alternates was picked up.
Okay.
I will look into that, and I will let you know which one it was. But I know there was modification of the plans
Yeah.
based on what you submitted.
That's good.
I think the big discussion point was, there was the motion, there was some thought of, you know, do you have motion activated lights? So they
Mhm.
would come up when the bicycles went past and
Mhm.
come down. And there
Mhm.
was some thought of, you know, with the corners, does that still give you the right, does that still do its job if it's coming up as the bicyclist is coming in? And that's the conversation I remember. That's it for the sustainability plan.
Oh, you want to update on the bike racks?
Yes, so bike racks, and 3 points. So one, some security cameras over at the train station. We finally worked out the last kinks with those this week. You'll see a blurb about it in the newsletter this week. Working on some signage and things to put up. But that's, again, one little win as far as trying to, it seems like the biggest thing I hear about bicycling in this town is how everyone knows someone that had a bike stolen at Lake Bluff train
Yes.
station.
My husband's had
At least
3
one.
stolen
Right.
from Lake Bluff train station.
So we hope both a deterrent to theft and a way to catch thieves. The cameras are great. Won't show you pictures, so we don't advertise where they are, but you can look around, you can see them. You can catch license plates with them. You can see pimples on people's faces with them.
Oh, my God.
Wow,
Good to know.
don't, yeah, exactly, don't go out without your makeup.
Practice good skincare.
Tell my husband, don't pick your nose on the
Get your ponytail set.
So in the upcoming budget cycle, we're getting ready to go through a 2-year cycle. So there's a few sustainability type things we're evaluating as part of that. We had a proposal from last year to start installing bike racks in the downtown that we'll bring back for this budget cycle, and we feel pretty good about finding some funding for. So if
But
there's-
that didn't include it's updating bike racks at the beach. That would be a future. These
That
were
would-
the ones here closer.
Yeah, and that would actually be the park district.
Oh,
Well, I talked a little bit to the school. What I'm hoping is that if we can get these newer style racks at the train station, which is a more of a theft area than other places in
Yeah.
town. That allows for more secure locking. You got the cameras, but more importantly, with the racks, if we come up with something and work with the architectural board and come up with something nice, maybe the village logo on some end caps, then that's a nice way to bring that rack style to the park district board, to the school board, and say, you gotta get rid of the carousels, you gotta look at these new secure, here's a nice way with the village logo, or maybe the school logo that you can get on, here's the price, and kind of get that standardized. And then I'm hoping that then we start to look, okay, more racks downtown for events, more racks at the beach, using this example, and hopefully it drives a lot of good discussion and welcoming of them.
Should we send some of that to the Park District now, because they've already done some layouts for new bike racks?
I didn't know that.
Above and below, and it's pretty extensive.
Okay,
And they're also planning new underlay for the bike racks, so it
Okay.
would be good to get it
Be
in
good.
now.
I hadn't heard about that, but that'll be my third call in the morning.
great.
Awesome.
That's
They
great to
did-
hear, though, that
Did a
it's on
meeting
their
and
radar.
showed some preliminary plans and ideas, and
Oh, great.
Do you know which, you happen to know which meeting it was? Was it the whole board, one of the committees?
no, it was just one of the, it wasn't a board, no. They did the meeting twice, two weeks in a row, to show
Oh.
people the ideas for the new
That's
beach
the
and park
ADA
district.
accessibility stuff. I didn't actually know that had bike racks in it, but we will
Yeah,
Be on
give
it.
them a call.
Yep,
they did.
There you go.
also
Good to
volume
know.
pricing.
Volume price.
We have to worry about this.
Again, that's comments from the public. I think
Yep.
we've talked
Okay.
about those items, and I'm happy to answer any questions about them if there are any.
Okay.
Oh,
Just checking.
sorry, next agenda item, general.
I got one more little item.
Okay, go ahead.
So again, fast, beach erosion ad hoc committee, important sustainability issue, not really our sustainability issue in the village specifically itself, but an important project,
Yes,
another big dollar figure, unfortunately. So stay tuned with that, and then
What are we doing to actually police people dumping on the ravines?
as always, can't be everywhere. If you see something, or if you especially see someone, calling the police department's the best thing to do.
What is he dumping?
They're grass and leaf clippings. I get to walk a multitude of ravine properties in town,
So I know
and
that.
you'd be surprised.
Mm.
Seems the bigger the property, the bigger the price tag, the more dumping there is.
Does any of the members want to share anything? Any things I've seen, read to the group, or we kind of,
Very last note, flyers, they're doing
Oh.
great.
yes.
So how are the flyers being used?
So right now, and this has been a little bit more stilted than I would like, in part because we haven't had some intern assistants materialize in the same way I was hoping for. So right now, we're distributing these in the e-newsletter. We've tried having them out printed at Village Hall, that didn't really get a lot of
Yeah.
mileage. Where I'm looking to go with it in the next, these next few months is really to get more of a social media twist on it.
Yeah, it
In
seems like it would be a good thing for Facebook kind of stuff and linking to articles.
Yeah. Some of these have performed pretty well. I mean, there have been times that this is the best, I know 106 doesn't look like a lot, but there have been times this has been the best performing thing in the e-newsletter. You know, you have 45% of people open it, 10% of all, 25% of that click it. That's relatively
Pretty
good.
good.
But, you know, try to get some more out of the same resources we're already putting together.
Can we put it in the newsletter?
And see what we got.
The one that gets,
Yeah,
yeah,
The big
yeah.
one.
the big one.
well, I tell you what,
Does this go out through the schools?
Yeah, that's another
Yeah, that's a
place.
good
Particularly-
point.
Again, Mrs. Nawar can have her kids distributing this to all the waiting mommies in the line.
Mm-hmm.
In their warm cars?
Yeah, the elementary school always saw that happening.
You'll note that this is all about idling at schools.
Yes,
Had a sweet photo of like a Corvette doing a burnout with all the smoke.
I think they put
Um,
some signs
We
before.
should,
on a
Probably a
non-recycled
couple of years
piece of
ago
paper.
that-
Just for you.
Yeah, we have done.
Yeah, but in the future, it should be on a recycled piece of paper.
Marina, I have recycled paper that's this white, I swear.
Not this coated.
It does feel coated.
This is, yeah, this is,
I'm just saying,
No.
I don't see any watermark on this that says recycled. And just thinking that if we're gonna be sitting in the
as long as we're
glass
composting.
house that we're throwing
Mhm.
stones from,
Yeah.
it should be recycled paper,
I will most
if
certainly
it's gonna be
investigate.
paper at all.
And we only, because this is kind of late breaking, that's the only reason it's
That's
Printed
fine,
here
Glenn,
for
it's
you.
just 7 of it.
7.
you haven't distributed them to every home in the.
Glenn, I had a question about the beach committee, beach erosion committee. So they've made an arrangement or agreement to take sand from, like contaminated sand that's cleaned and then come to Lake Bluff? Is that right? It's part of the cleanup in Waukegan, or
Sure,
what was
so
it? It was it's something that seemed a little disturbing to me.
I can give you some general answers, again, not our project and not really with that committee.
Oh,
So,
okay, it's not that committee.
yeah, one of 4 communities on Lake Michigan that's receiving that. We are one of 4 communities on Lake Michigan receiving that sand, which is from the Waukegan Harbor. So on the inside of the Waukegan Harbor, there were industrial plants that emitted PCBs. I don't know if that was Superfund at one point, but contaminated sand in there.
It was big time.
Yeah.
Worst PCB mess known to man.
Superfunds are,
And it's had to be cleaned twice.
Yeah,
takes time.
Superfund.
So that's on the,
It's Johnson Motors.
yes. So that's on the interior of the harbor. And my understanding is that the sand there doesn't really circulate through Lake Michigan. I mean, the harbor structures keep it in the harbor. On the approach path into the harbor, the approach channel, that does take in sand from Lake Michigan, doesn't let it out. That needs to be dredged periodically to keep the channel
For
navigable.
navigation.
Yeah. So what all the Army Corps is doing is they're taking that dredged sand, which they're certifying is clean. There's a whole federal process they've gone through to affirm that. And they're just dropping it off at the people that need sand.
And
And we feel
actually-
good about the federal government. I don't know.
No,
like-
but I mean, where actually are you
After
gonna
things
get
have been-
clean sand?
No, but it's just, yeah. I'm
Sophie?
sorry.
Where can you actually get clean
Yeah,
sand?
that I haven't discovered, but I would say of like any place in the world I can think of getting sand, Waukegan Harbor would not be the first.
True.
But I understand proximity wise, and if it's just a little, it makes me feel like I will never go to the beach.
Western Michigan, they got some really big sand.
You've got pretty sand there.
Try that.
But it's all gotten whatever we've pushed from this
No,
side
I
of
mean,
the
that
west.
stuff's up like 100 feet up above the lake. It's ancient sand.
It's been blown dry.
Yeah.
So I know you're not the only person to voice that
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you, the best I can tell you is that it's from a different part of that harbor that was not exposed to that. And of course, there's.
Yeah, if you look at the plumes, the contaminated sediments do I'm sure the harbor holds it, but they do eventually go out, which is why it's really important to clean contaminated sediments up quickly, because once they disperse, you can never afford to get them back. And they've had to clean the harbor twice, because the first time they cleaned it, then the federal government changed the standards. You know, it had to be fewer parts per billion for PCB, so then they had to clean it again. Anyways, we don't need to take time here, but I would have some concerns.
Wonder if you could take
Duly
like a
noted.
mason jar and send it out for study.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if they're certifying it, but it's sort of how much, if you
How
had the
much-
choice to play in sand that had PCBs in it or not.
Or go to Western Michigan.
So part of that is, maybe I'm using the word certifying poorly, but there's a whole environmental impact statement study, yada, yada, yada.
No,
You
I'm
think
sure.
better than I
I
do.
know.
And the other part I would say is, we're getting the sand because the Corps has to dredge it already, right?
Yeah,
They got the sand, they got to put it somewhere.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's just our
that's the
federal
wrong-
government repeatedly, anyway, it offers the most generous of like what's safe, and that is always changing, and, anyway.
Yes, like
Yep.
hair color.
Okay,
That's true.
Yeah, that was frightening.
all right. Co-chairs reports?
I have none. I'm still waiting for an egg.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm just gonna go straight, I'm just gonna be straight up on this. I cannot tell you how many people ask me on a regular basis, do you have roosters? And I say, no, it's not allowed in Lake Bluff. How can you have an egg without a rooster?
We've been
Okay.
away from the farm a long time.
And that's when I really realized we need to have more chickens in Lake Bluff. Because you need to understand that eggs exist without roosters. Chickens do not exist without roosters. So that's my public service announcement.
Okay. Can you do a flyer on recycled paper?
Yeah. No, I'm doing it,
Maybe we should talk to the science teachers, make sure that's in the curriculum as well, just.
but I will
Locally.
also say that.
Maybe the elementary school should have chickens.
Just if anybody's paying attention, Trout Unlimited has a program through the IDNR for a science curriculum where they will provide the aquarium and the curriculum, and you can raise trout to be released in Lake Michigan under IDNR supervision and Trout Unlimited. So for any
Like
teachers.
in a household?
No, at
In
a
a s-
school. They want it in a
So
school.
like how big, like trout are big. Okay, so schools.
No, they release fry, which are about this big,
Yeah.
into the lake.
They do a lot of that already for the sportsmen.
Yeah, yes, but they
But no,
also
but
do
it's
it
a nice
for the
program.
health. Yeah, it's a nice
Science.
program,
Yes.
and it's science, and we could be availing ourselves of it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Can you send
I
me
like
that
that.
link? Do you know? You have it? You have the flyer?
Bet we could Google it.
Okay, no, nothing from
Got
me.
I've got digits for you. Oh, next meeting?
Yeah, before we adjourn, can we talk about the next meeting?
Sure.
'Cause I know we've had, and I've had some travel and some other people been out of town. When would be the next time for the meeting?
So I would say a couple things. One, ordinarily, it would fall on Monday, January the 6th.
I already know that's trouble for me, because I'm a grandmother, and I'm going to go see the baby.
I'm out of town too.
How about the next 3 weeks of January?
I'd have to look at dates to see what's available, so
Okay.
the late in January, we may have some availability, probably, perhaps the 20th,
That's month the 20th is Martin Luther
20th
King
is,
Day.
yeah.
nope, not that,
Probably not a
Oh,
good one.
bummer.
the 20, well, that'll be the
27th
school
is-
board,
Mm.
27th would be the village board.
Mm.
Yeah, we'd have to circulate some dates for
So
you.
then, do we
Okay.
just assume
I don't think
February
this
3rd?
I don't think this first Monday of the month is working,
February 3rd is a Friday.
just in the sun.
As a broader
February 3rd's a
conversation,
Friday?
you know,
Oh, I thought
I
we were,
mean, or you said, I thought you said January. February 3rd.
we can also, we can look at moving the time of the month permanently. You don't have to meet every month, if that would be easier. I mean, certainly, the last few months have been difficult to get everyone together, and so if it would be easier to accommodate schedules, was less frequently, that's this group's decision. We're happy to work with.
Just depends on timing as opposed to frequency.
Well, it depends on kind of what we need to do as a committee. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, if
what the
we're in the middle
workload
of
is,
something,
'cause,
yeah.
I mean, you hate to just have a meeting, take a meeting unless there's, something that.
Is everyone available? I'm sorry, yeah, I agree. I think that, if we could say it's every other month, but if there's a, if
Better
there's,
to schedule it and cancel it if we
Yeah,
don't
I
need
agree.
it than to
Okay.
not have it.
so speaking of this, should we just shoot for the
Thank you,
3rd of
Marina.
February? Does that work, Monday the 3rd?
That works.
So, but I'm not sure yet. At this point, it does.
Okay, why don't we target that?
Okay.
That'll also give me a little extra time to get the draft of the model lighting ordinance for that meeting.
Very good. And then looking more globally, again, if there's a different time of the month that may work better, please send me your ideas. Again, we're constrained by the other uses of this space throughout the week and throughout the month, but happy to look at alternatives going forward after February 3rd if there's something that will work better on a regular basis.
Were there certain things from the or maybe this would be a February topic of, like, what we wanted to bite off from the sustainability plan sort of going forward? Or maybe we feel like we have enough that we've bitten off?
We presented a short list to the village board when the sustainability plan was approved.
Right.
I don't recall what was on that right now.
Yeah, so maybe we look at it in February. We also may be absorbed in the recycling education.
Right.
But that's a good time to get started
It's a
too,
good
because you're in
time,
spring
right.
and
Mhm.
things,
Update
kind of plan for the,
what's happened between now and then. And village actions as well as where we need to look ahead.
Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Right.
Happy holidays.